All right, cool. Let's do this. We're going to do it in English. I'm Tiago, I'm from Mexico, but we're streaming online and we want to make this available to as many people as possible. So if you need translators, there's devices back there that can help you out with this. So today, I'm going to tell you a story. And this is a story of a project called Worldcoin. And I'll be the first one to admit that this is a pretty crazy story. Because this is the story of why and how we want to scan the eyes of 1 billion people with a shiny ball, right? Now, to tell you this story, first we have to go back to why we're doing this, right? And what are we even trying to do? And so we're in 2022, and the world is changing pretty fast. Over the next 50 years or so, biotechnology will change the way medicine works. We have other things like different sources of energy that are going to be available, whether it's renewable energy or maybe even new types of nuclear energy that will make energy significantly cheaper and very widely available. We will interact with computers in new ways, whether it's something like VR or brain-computer interfaces. The way we interact with technology will change. But perhaps the most important change that will happen over the next 50 years is the rise of artificial intelligence. Within 50 years, AI will be sufficiently powerful and advanced to replace many of the jobs that we do today. And now that can be very cool, or it can suck, right? That is up to us, what happens in the next 50 years. And a big part of that story is recognizing that there will be a transition period for the world that we have today and the world that we will have. And then there will be some new world after that, right? And now there's a bunch of things that need to happen to make sure that this goes well. But one of those that we really believe in is that we believe that we need a new financial network in the world. One that is more inclusive, one that is more fair, and one that can enable experiments like UBI, which we really believe in, to make front to this new world, right? And with something like UBI, this world can actually be super exciting, right? We can have a capitalistic society where everyone can work on whatever they want, right? And we don't have poverty. And now, to do that, we actually think that this new financial system needs to be global and internet native from scratch. And no matter how you think about it, the only way to achieve it is with decentralized blockchains. And more specifically, we are very excited about the Ethereum blockchain, right? And so what do we do at Worldcoin? It's very simple. We're building a bunch of tools and technologies that will help move the world to this new decentralized financial system so that hopefully we can enable things like UBI, which we really care about, right? So now, what are we actually building? The first thing is we've established that crypto is awesome, and we want to get people there. But it has two core problems. Very few people have actually used it or tried it. And all of the value is actually being hoarded by people like you and I, right? Insiders and miners that get all of the airdrops when they first happen. And we think this sucks, right? And so about 2 years ago, we said, what would have happened if something like Bitcoin had started by giving 1 Bitcoin to every person in the world, rather than minting it with proof of work? Right? And we really like this idea because this would have accomplished a few things. It would have onboarded a bunch of people into crypto. It would have educated them about how to use it, and it would have forced them to use it. And most importantly, it would have spread the value of Bitcoin and of that store of value. Right? Now, unfortunately, we're 11 years or however many years too late with to do this with Bitcoin, but we just said, screw it, let's just try it with some other token. And so we created a token called Worldcoin, right? And that is exactly what Worldcoin is. Worldcoin is a global cryptocurrency that every person can claim a part of simply for being a human. It is free, and everyone can do it. And so there is only ever going to be 10 billion tokens, or at least that's the initial design. And most of that, over 80%, will go to the world. We will take 10% of that to fund the project, and you will see exactly what we're using that for, and 10% to global contributors who are helping make that project a reality, right? So we're super excited. This was the first thing, and we said, yeah, this is an awesome idea to onboard people to crypto, educate them, and just spread the value of crypto. But then we get to part 2, right? This is where it starts getting more interesting, and this is where we'll spend most of the time today, which is this very pesky problem. Is how do you make sure people only claim their part once? Right? If you're giving away what is essentially free money, how do you make sure people don't double dip? Right? And originally we thought this was a very easy problem, but the more we thought about it, it was so hard. Because there's this thing called civil attacks. And civil attacks is basically the idea that when you're online, you don't know if 20 accounts are actually 20 people, or they're just one person with 20 accounts. Right? And it's really hard to figure out how to solve that problem. And for the case of Worldcoin, if we actually wanted to give Worldcoin to everyone, we had to solve that. And so we started thinking, okay, how can we solve it? And there was specifically 3 characteristics that were really important to us when solving this problem of Sybil resistance. First, whatever we did had to be privacy preserving. No cool new token was worth sacrificing the privacy of an entire planet. Secondly, it had to be inclusive, right? Whatever we did had to work, and had not just to work in the middle of Manhattan with people that have high bandwidth and really fancy phones. It had to work for everyone, right? And then lastly, it had to be scalable. If we were trying to do something for the world, there had to be a feasible path to actually get this to the entire world. And so we started thinking, and we started what most people would. Right? Let's just make people verify their phone number or email. Right? It turns out that that doesn't really work, because then if you're giving away free money, then you just make a new email, and new email, and new email, and so on and so forth. Then we said, okay, what do banks do? Right? What are the solutions today? And it turns out most institutions today turn to something that is KYC. Right? They just verify your passport or verify your some type of identity. Now, the problem with that is that first and foremost, it's not private at all. Right? We would have, either us or ourselves, would have to collect all of your personal information, your name, your ID, who you are, where you were born, and we didn't want that. Right? But most importantly, over half of the population in the world would not have been able to use this, because they either don't have an ID, or there's just no APIs, reliable APIs, to be able to verify those documents. Right? Then we ran into this really cool solution called Web of Trust. And Web of Trust is the idea of, if I am a trusted person, and I trust you, I can just say, hey, I, Tiago, can certify that this other person is real. Right? And with that, you can build this sort of network where each person has a reputation, and you can build a very cool system where if people cheat, you just punish the entire chain, and it becomes very difficult to cheat. Now, Web of Trust is actually how we think we'll scale Worldcoin. The problem with Web of Trust is that you need a very large set of very high trusted users to start with. Right? It's really difficult to kick off. And so Web of Trust is awesome. We can use it from 1 billion users to 8 billion users, but how do we get the first billion? Right? That was the problem. And as we kept thinking about it, the only solution that we kept coming back to was biometrics. Right? At the end of the day, if you want to make sure that each person only does something once, your biometrics is what sets you apart from other people. Right? And so we said, okay, what can we do in biometrics? Well, there's a couple of problems with biometrics. First, you have to be able to distinguish 1 in billions of people, right? 1 in 10 billion people. Usually with something like your phone, it's distinguishing just between you and a previous recording of you, right? So Face ID on the iPhone can distinguish between 1 in a million people, officially by Apple. We actually estimate that it's probably between 1 in 10 million people. But that means that after signing up 5 million people, you would have a 50% chance of just rejecting someone falsely and saying like, hey, you cannot participate because you've already signed up, right? And so when it comes to different types of biometrics you can use, it turns out that you need something that has enough data to be able to distinguish between this amount of people, and something that is very difficult to cheat with. Right? Let's imagine that I use my palm, and let's imagine that it has enough data. I could just make a small cut, and now tomorrow I'm a new person. Now, that wouldn't help me to unlock a phone that uses this palm, but if what I'm trying to prove is that I haven't done something before, that I'm a new person to a network, then I could just keep making small cuts on my hand, and I'm a new person every time. Right? It turns out that we went through fingerprints, there's not enough data. Your face, there's also not enough data, and it's really easy to change. The palm, it's not very studied. We actually think palms are very cool, and there's some very cool things you can do with the veins. Amazon is doing a lot of work in that area, but it's not very well studied, and so we just couldn't back it up. Then there's DNA, which is just too creepy, even for us, to be honest. And then you land on iris, right? It turns out iris, for many, many decades, have been a proven solution for this. This is why governments use them for when you're going into the airport, right? It's very difficult to change your iris, and there is more than enough data to be able to distinguish between so many people. So we said, okay, let's do irises, but now how do we do it with the phone, right? And it turns out with the phone, with the camera, you just don't have the resolution that you need. And so then we said, okay, let's go to get whatever devices the government buys. And it turns out that those sort of work, but they cannot distinguish between 1 in a billion people, and they can also not operate in an untrusted environment, right? If you send that to some random place in Mexico City where I'm from, someone can very easily hack that device, right? And so eventually we just came to the conclusion of, we have to build our own hardware. We have to build our own hardware so that we have the resolution that we need and so that we can build in all of the security necessary to operate in untrusted environments. And this was a very sad realization, because building hardware sucks. And building hardware takes a long time, and it's a pain in the ass, and you never want to build hardware. And so we spent a few more months thinking of other stuff, but we just couldn't get around this. And so we said, screw it, let's build our own hardware. We spent about 2 years building it, and this little beauty came out. And this is called the orb. And I have an orb right here with me. And the orb actually went through, at this point, 7 generations. Here I have 5 generations of the orb. And the orb is a device that verifies your iris to make sure that you are unique and real. Okay? And so let's talk about what exactly it does. First of all, when you look at the orb, it looks at your face. It makes sure that you're a real person, that you're an adult, that is alive, that isn't cheating, that isn't wearing prosthetics, that isn't wearing contact lenses, things like that. Then it generates what we call an iris code from your iris. And then that is the only piece of information that has to leave the orb by default. And it gets compared today on a server, very soon on-chain, with all of the previous iris hashes of people that have tried to use the orb. Right? Now, if it turns out that you have never tried to use the orb, then the orb registers what we call a Face ID. And we'll get into that in a second. Okay? And so those are the 3 things that the orb does. As I said, by default, the only data that needs to leave the orb is this iris code. Now, we give you the option of backing up more data if you want to avoid having to return to an orb to renew your ID when it expires, right? Just like any ID, as we update the technology, it eventually expires. And so you have the option of either returning to an orb to just collect your biometrics from scratch, or if you want to back up your biometrics, you can do that, and you don't need to return to an orb when your ID expires, right? And so we're really happy with this, because we don't need to do ID verification, we don't need your contact info, we don't need selfies, we don't even need your name, right? We don't need anything to be able to let you claim your Worldcoin. But this was not enough. We wanted more privacy. And so we found this really cool piece of technology called Uranus Proofs, and we built what is honestly a little bit of a complex system, which I will not get into. But at its core, what it allows us to do is it allows you to anonymously verify that you are a person that has been certified by the orb by being real and that has never claimed Worldcoin before. And you can do this without revealing who you are. Right? And so we call this protocol World ID, and it's the second piece of technology that we're building. And World ID is a privacy-first decentralized identity. And its core primitive is this proof of personhood that is issued by the orb. World ID is super exciting because it's actually a completely open protocol. It's self-custodial on your phone, even if it's not financial. And you can actually do really cool things with World ID. But before I get into those, something that's very important to clarify is World ID is not your iris code. We only use biometrics to decide whether you get issued a World ID. World ID is also not your wallet, because we want people to be able to be pseudonymous online. So you can have 100 wallets with 100 different identities, and behind all of them, you only have one World ID, right? And so you can use your wallet one day for one thing and another wallet for a different thing. And the only thing that World ID makes sure of is that you don't do one action twice with 2 different wallets, right? But World ID is not connected to your wallets. World ID is some new type of random key that we generate locally on device, and you are the custodian of that. Now, just as we use World ID for you to show that, hey, you're a real person that has never claimed Worldcoin before, it turns out that developers can actually, or anyone can actually use World ID to do a bunch of other things, right? And so with World ID, you can actually do one person, one vote, right? You can anonymously prove that you've never voted on some snapshot vote before and vote on that. You can also join a Discord server or take a loan or do a bunch of different things anonymously proving that you've never done them before, powered by World ID. And so the way that looks like is you have a website and you have a new element that looks like a CAPTCHA, right? And that CAPTCHA, when you check it, it shows you a QR code. You scan that with your Worldcoin app, and the app tells you like, hey, this app is trying to verify that you haven't done this before. When you press verify with World ID, we generate a zero knowledge proof on device that gets submitted, and then it gets processed by the website, and then you get to do whatever action you wanted to do. Now, before continuing to the next section, this is obviously very counterintuitive, right? The fact that biometrics is the most private way we could find out of everything that we consider is very counterintuitive. And so we've written a couple of things, and we've made a few resources available that go a lot deeper into this. So in ETH New York, a few months ago, we had a full session where we actually completely dismantled an orb and talked about the security and the different elements. You can go check that out on YouTube. On our website, we have a blog post called Privacy Preserving Proof of Personhood Protocol, which is a bit of a joke, but also walks down through the entire protocol of like how this works in the ZK piece. And we also have one more page in worldcoin.org/privacy that breaks down for all of the different products that we have, like what are we collecting and why. All right. So now we're almost there, but we have all of these really cool things, and like now what do you do with them, right? How do you get 1 billion people on this? And specifically, what should people be using this stuff for today, right? Because it's very cool to hear, okay, in 10 years, this UBI and all of this fluffy stuff, and when you have 1 billion people, of course, the identity will be useful. But what about today, right? Why should people sign up today? And more specifically, like what should they be using it for, and what should that experience look like, right? And it became very obvious to us as we were trying to onboard the first users, and we were telling them about MetaMask and this and that crypto products are just not there yet today in terms of their simplicity. And so what we did is we built an app. And this app is called the Worldcoin app. And it is a very simple, you cannot really see it here, but it's a very, very simple version of a wallet. It allows you to explore other tokens, and eventually you'll be able to buy and sell them other than Worldcoin, and obviously use everything in the ecosystem. So what the Worldcoin app is, again, is just a very simple self-custodial Ethereum wallet. It allows you to use, obviously, everything in the Worldcoin ecosystem. So Worldcoin, claim that, vest that over time, send it to your friends. It allows you to use World ID and claim your World ID and update it when you need it. But also, we expose a bunch of DeFi primitives in a very abstracted and friendly way in the app so that crypto is actually useful for people today. The app is really about those two things, making crypto usable and useful today for normal people. Now, advanced users will probably keep using Rainbow and MetaMask and all of those awesome products, but what we needed was something that my mom could use, right? And so now with all of those things together, we said, okay, let's go out to the world and let's see what this looks like. And so we went out to a bunch of places. We went out to malls, and we went out to campuses and universities, and we spent a lot of time in the streets, and we even started converting some former foes. And in general, in total, we went to over 25 countries around the world, just letting them claim and participate what we call Worldcoin beta, right? The Worldcoin token hasn't launched, but they're claiming what we call beta tokens, which will convert one-to-one to Worldcoin when Worldcoin launches. And everything that they're claiming right now is additional to what they will receive, just like any other normal person when they sign up, right? And so this has been what we've been doing for the past year or so, going to a bunch of countries around the world, rich and poor and hot and cold. You can imagine we had to test the reliability of the orb in different weather environments, dust and rain, and different social norms, and how do you approach people and how do you explain crypto. And it's been awesome. And throughout the process, we've learned a lot, and most people are really happy. Now, I will also recognize that some people aren't very happy that we're doing this, right? Most of that is actually our fault, because the truth is we've sucked at communicating, right? We've been really bad at telling our story. And so, for example, some people think like, hey, you're connecting irises on-chain to wallets. Like, no, that's not what we're doing, but that's our bad, right? It's just too complex to explain that. Now, other people say, well, just biometrics is never okay, right? I tape Face ID on my iPhone, I tape the camera on my Mac, I don't want to use biometrics. And that is totally fair, right? If biometrics is not something that you're comfortable with in general, if you don't use Touch ID on your iPhone, then you should probably wait until World ID supports Web of Trust, and you're probably not going to be one of the first billion users, and that's fine, right? Now, one last thing that we sometimes get questions about is, well, you're going not just to Europe, not just to the US, you're going to India, you're going to Mexico, you're going to Chile, you're going to Kenya. Why are you going there? Aren't you preying on the poor? And to be honest, it is so hard, it is so much harder to operate and be in those countries than it would be to just be in New York, right? Because you have to support old phones, you have to support slow internet, you have to support a bunch of things, but at the end of the day, we believe that crypto should be for all. And at the end of the day, most of the world is developing, like where I'm from, and if we cannot find a way to make crypto work for the developing world, crypto will never fulfill its mission. And so yes, it's a pain in the ass to operate in these places, and yes, we're going to continue to get shit for it because people will say we're colonialist or whatever it is, but honestly, when you look at the team, it's just a bunch of locals like myself trying to make crypto work for their own countries, right? And so that is a beta, and throughout the beta, we've killed it. We have onboarded almost 650,000 people with just 30 orbs on the field in about a year. That is insane. That is an insane amount of new users that all have private keys and crypto on their phones without having to understand shit of what we're talking about, right? Now, at the same time, 650,000 is a lot smaller compared to the 1 billion users that we want to get to, right? And so what is next for Worldcoin? Well, first of all, we're in the process of open sourcing our entire stack. Right? We announced about 2 months ago that the entire Worldcoin stack will be open source, and we are about halfway through that transition. The core protocol is open source, the World ID SDK is open source, and parts of the app are already open source. Over the next few months, before the end of the year, we will open source the rest of the app, and we will open source the hardware of the orb. And then next year, we hope to be able to open source the firmware of the orb, and then potentially the AI that the orb uses. We talk a lot about more on a blog post on our website about why we can open source each of these components when we are open sourcing them. So if you're curious about that, you can check it out on the blog post. The second thing that we're doing is we're opening up the SDK for developers. Now, these we haven't announced formally, but we've actually been giving a sneak peek at a bunch of different conferences and different hackathons for developers to play with for the past 3 months. So we will still not announce it officially for a few more months, but if you want to actually play with this, you can go on id.worldcoin.org and already see documentation and build your own implementations. And we support both on-chain implementations and what we call cloud implementations, which is basically an API request, right? The next thing that we're doing is we're scaling, right? We mentioned we signed up almost 1 million users with 30 orbs, but now we have a factory, right? And now we are starting to pump out orbs at a significantly higher level. And so about a month ago, we made a batch of 250 orbs, and right now we're making a second batch of a couple of hundred orbs, and by the end of the year, we will have around 1,000 orbs on the field, signing up users at the same rate that we are signing up today. That also means that we have to grow the team, right? So in general, if what we're doing vibes with what you believe in, please shoot us an email or go to our website or shoot us a Twitter, because we are hiring across the board. Now, you might not see all of the positions on our website, but if you're an engineer, Solidity, mobile, hardware, AI, community, whatever you can think of, we're hiring for it, and so just send us a message. Now, we're not just growing that team, we're actually decentralizing. Like, the idea of Worldcoin is that we want to get rid of it as quickly as possible. And so we will talk a lot more about this over the next 6 months, but as you can imagine, decentralizing a protocol is a lot easier than decentralizing hardware. And so we will follow, like many projects, some sort of gradual decentralization. Parts of that we're already doing, and that's why we start by open sourcing. And so if you are curious, if you want to help out without joining Worldcoin, we're already open for that. And we will be announcing a grants program pretty soon to power this. And then lastly, we need to launch, right? We need to leave the beta stage and actually launch the Worldcoin token and be live on mainnet, right? And so this is what is coming up for Worldcoin. If you want to keep up with all of this stuff, you can join the Discord at discord.gg/Worldcoin. We are down to hear your ideas, your hot takes, anything that you want. We're also on Twitter and pretty much every social media as @Worldcoin. And that's pretty much it. So just to summarize, Worldcoin is a global currency that any person can claim a part of simply for being a person. To do that and to enable UBI, we've also built a global decentralized and privacy-friendly identity and the simplest Ethereum wallet out there, right? So that's pretty much it. Thank you so much for coming, and see you out there.